Kamala Harris putting former President Biden on blast over his decision to run for another term. The Atlantic publishing an excerpt from her new book, 107 Days, and she writes this. It's Joe and Jill's decision. We all said that like a mantra, as if we'd all been hypnotized. Was it grace or was it recklessness? In retrospect, I think it was recklessness. The stakes were simply too high. This wasn't a choice that should have been left to an individual's ego, an individual's ambition. It should have been more than a personal decision. And Yemisi Egbawole is a former chief of staff to the White House press office under President Biden and Podium Strategies founder now. So, Yemisi, okay, I know that in some situations you say, okay, what is the boss saying that we're going to do? What is the boss's decision? And then we execute on that plan. But what she's saying now is not at all what she was saying during the campaign. And if she had said some of these things then, might the outcome have been different?
I'm not so sure she even had the room to do that. I mean, when we think back to that infamous interview she had on The View right after the Democratic National Convention, and they were asked, what would you do differently than President Biden? She wasn't able to give an answer. And that really has to do with the position she was put in as vice president. I think it's great that she's getting to set the narrative now. I think her race, 107 days, has been one of the most talked about things in politics, and everyone has given their opinion on it, and we're finally going to hear directly from her what she thought about that.
All right, guys. So before we get into this video, I just want to let you guys know that it is extremely tough for me given the current situation that the country is dealing with the assassination of Charlie Kirk and the manhunt for his killer. Yes, it is very tough for me to do my normal regular topics, okay? But we're still going to continue to do the show. And if there are any new developments with Charlie Kirk as of the making of this video, after I finish making this video, then I will get that to you guys. But as I'm making this video, there are no new updates outside of what I've already covered today. But I will continue to stay on it, and it's at the top of my mind. But I am still going to do the normal topics, the normal things I cover on this channel. What's going on in politics is tough, but the show must continue, and that's what we have to talk about here today, because Kamala Harris's book that nobody's going to read. Kamala apparently threw Joe Biden under the bus in this new book. Okay, she basically is trying to clear her name of any type of fault that is put on why Democrats lost to Trump. They're still trying to play the blame game, point the fingers, try to figure out how did they lose to Trump. And this is Kamala's turn, right? Remember Corinne Jean-Pierre, right? She came out with an announcement of a book, and nobody gave a damn. She actually got a lot of backlash for that, right? In this book, again, this is Kamala Harris essentially, throwing Joe Biden under the bus, right? This is her trying to distance herself from that disaster. She's basically saying that, hey, it wasn't my fault that Joe Biden decided to run again.
Okay. The Atlantic has published an excerpt from former Vice President Kamala Harris's forthcoming new book entitled 107 Days. And in it, Harris details the challenges she faced when Joe Biden dropped out of the race and she was suddenly tapped to run for president. In it, she writes, during all those months of growing panic, should I have told Joe to consider not running? Perhaps. It's Joe and Jill's decision. We all said that, like a mantra, as if we'd all been hypnotized. Was it grace or was it recklessness? In retrospect, I think it was recklessness. The stakes were simply too high. This wasn't a choice that should have been left to an individual's ego, an individual's ambition. It should have been more than a personal decision. I was well aware of my delicate status. Lore has it that every outgoing chief of staff always tells the incoming president's chief of staff, rule number one, watch the VP. I often learned that the president's staff was adding fuel to negative narratives that sprang up around me. When the stories were unfair or inaccurate, the president's inner circle seemed fine with it. Indeed, it seemed as if they decided I should be knocked down a little bit more. Their thinking was zero-sum. If she's shining, he's dimmed. None of them grasped that if I did well, he did well. That given the concerns about his age, my visible success as his vice president was vital. It would serve as a testament to his judgment in choosing me and reassurance that if something happened, the country was in good hands.
Well,
that is from Kamala Harris's new book.
Yeah.
But
I was just going to say, so Willie or who wants to take the jump ball here? Rev, I'll go to you. So you know politics. I mean, you've run for president. A couple of things here. I can understand everybody wringing their hands saying, why didn't we step in? Why didn't we intervene? I can understand the Vice President Harris doing that. But people that know Joe Biden and Jill Biden know, speaking of jump balls, nobody was going to take that ball from their hands. They were determined. I mean, I talk to a lot of people. I do a lot of people around the Bidens, and the further you get away from it, the further you realize that Joe Biden and Jill Biden were not going to be talked out of anything until the pressure was overwhelming. That's number one. Number two, vice presidents are treated badly by the president's staff. Ask Joe Biden. There were times he was treated absolutely horrifically by Barack Obama's staff. Just no respect. And sadly, that happened. So people that may be saying, oh, well, Kamala Harris is bitter. Nah, you know, this unfortunately is a dynamic that happens in every White House.
Yeah, so that's a whole lot of cope there from MSNBC, right? BS now. The reality is that this is politics. Kamala Harris, she may be trying to gear up for a 2028 run. And in order for her to do that, again, she has to distance herself from Biden. Okay, that's part of the reason why she lost in 2024, outside the fact that she's just a terrible candidate. But again, part of her being a terrible candidate is her being unable to distance herself from Joe Biden. So this is her attempt to do that. She's basically saying that Biden's staff treated her bad. Well, they were mean to me. Okay, when there were negative narratives put out about me in the media, they didn't defend me. Like, for example, in 2023, when Democrats were struggling to even acknowledge that Kamala Harris would be Joe Biden's running mate, right? You guys remember that? Y'all remember there was an actual time where Democrats would not openly support Kamala Harris running as Joe Biden's VP, despite the fact that she's currently the sitting VP. Yeah, they were talking about Pete Buttigieg. Pete Buttigieg replacing Kamala Harris and having Kamala Harris go to the Supreme Court, right? That is what they were talking about. Those are what the conversations were about, okay? So the Biden administration, the Biden White House, apparently didn't push back hard enough against all of the negative press that Kamala was getting. In fact, they probably were the ones that were leaking this idea that Kamala Harris needed to be replaced. So there was trouble in Wonderland in the White House between Kamala and Joe Biden, and it seems as if that trickled into Biden's decision to continue to run. Because remember, when Biden first got into office, he said that he was a transitional president. And it was a foregone conclusion that Kamala was going to take the reins. Like, she was going to be running, that Biden was going to bow out and let Kamala run. But that's not what happened, right? That's not what happened. Again, because into Biden's presidency, there was rumors and reports coming out of Kamala Harris not being good, right? Not being very competent. There was a lot of issues with her staff. They just weren't really getting along, okay? And I think that ultimately played into Biden's decision to stay in the race. And again, you're now seeing Kamala try to distance herself, right? Come up with excuses for why is it that Biden stayed in and that she didn't actually stage a public coup against Joe Biden, which is what some people would have had liked to see her do, right? Which is to just kind of take the reins from Joe Biden, because again, Joe Biden was supposed to be a transitional president in the first place, and it was supposed to be her job, right? But that's not what ended up happening, right? Democrats decided to stick with Joe Biden when Kamala should have been the obvious answer. But again, Kamala was so incompetent that Democrats decided, nah, we rather stick with a declining Joe Biden than to roll the dice on her, okay? Until they had like absolutely no choice whatsoever. And that's when they decided to stage the coup against Biden. So without further ado, let's react to the cackling hens cope over the Democrats and more infighting.
There was plenty of money on the Democratic side,
She did a phenomenal job. She also just raised the morale in general. It went from this doom and gloom to this bright light of hope, which is when you think about it, hope is what Obama ran on. People want hope. They don't want carnage and dark and nothingness. But the thing I think she got right there, she was talking about, she says it was reckless to leave this decision to run again to Joe and Jill Biden and the people around them. And I said repeatedly, right here, over and over again, it seems like people are too close to this situation. And it wasn't about his mental stability, because she even says in there, he was amazing. She writes very clearly, she wasn't hiding anything.
Yeah, but that was the perception that people had because of people like I just mentioned.
Well, but you could conflate two things. She addresses his debate performance and says that he was tired, he'd been on 2 trips. But my point here is, being the president of the United States is the most consequential job in the world. If you think someone is going to be tired or not going to be able to handle it, you put your best person in. So I would say that it was always up to the people around them, and I didn't know until her remarks how separated the vice president and the president's teams are. I think this country deserves better. This is not an ego trip where someone gets credit, someone doesn't. You're a team or you're not a team.
Well, I mean, that's a naive understanding of politics, because let's be real, almost everybody in politics is a narcissist. They're in it for themselves. They're not really team players, right? Especially on the Democratic side of the aisle. And in a situation like that, yeah, I mean, that's obviously what was going on, right? Biden was looking out for his own political best interest, and Kamala was looking out for her political best interest, which, again, is why she's now saying this, because it's in her political best interest to try to distance herself from the disaster of Joe Biden by saying that, well, it was reckless for them not to throw me in, right? It was reckless for Joe Biden not to just hand off, you know, the keys to me, right? But the reality for Kamala is that she didn't prove that she was somebody that was so overwhelmingly talented or overwhelmingly popular or overwhelmingly competent to take over for Joe Biden, right? That's the crazy part about it, is that they're mad at Joe Biden because Joe Biden decided not to step aside, and they're saying, well, what about Democrats? What about the team? Well, at the end of the day, they don't want anything more than to beat Trump. And if they thought that Kamala gave them the best chance of beating Trump as Joe Biden was struggling, then they would have went with Kamala. They would have went with Kamala earlier. The reason why they didn't go with Kamala earlier doesn't really have much to do with Joe Biden, as much as it has to do with Kamala just being so bad that they legitimately thought that Biden was their best chance. Because again, in 2023, Democrats like Nancy Pelosi were hard-pressed to endorse Kamala being the VP or running again as VP with Joe Biden. So they never had faith in Kamala in the first place. They never had faith in her. So it wasn't just about Joe Biden, right? It was really about the fact that Kamala also just did not prove herself to be a competent person. And then look at her campaign. She raised billions of dollars. She had nothing but admiration from the mainstream level media, and she still failed, right? I mean, she didn't do an interview for like a month, okay? And the media was praising her as the next coming, right? The next Obama. And she still lost, okay? And yeah, I mean, a lot of this is just excuses at this point, instead of just acknowledging the fact that Kamala sucks. But if they really think that Kamala was so amazing, great. Have her run again in 2028. Have her run again in 2028.
I think to your point, Sarah, you know, I only read a chapter of the book so far. It really was revelatory. She really gave a lot of insight into what was happening during those 107 days. And what she wrote was that when polls indicated that I was getting more popular, the people around him, Biden, didn't like the contrast that was emerging. None of them grasped that if I did well, he did well. Right. And so it was the machine was working against her when they should have been working for the country and for the party.
Well, that's her perception.
And that's unfortunate.
That is her perception.
Well, I think she was living it. And I also think one of the things that she says, in retrospect, everyone was saying it's Joe and Jill's decision, and she was saying that as well. And she says, in retrospect, it was reckless because the stakes were simply too high. Look at what we are dealing with now as a country.
Exactly.
The stakes were too high. And the last thing that I will say is she herself said that all the people in the White House, she was in the worst position to make the case for Joe Biden to step aside because it would have seemed poisonously disloyal.
It wasn't her place.
And we know that Joe Biden loves, demands loyalty, and he gives loyalty. And so I think she's a very loyal person, and I think that is why she didn't say anything.
Yeah, I mean, again, these people are trying to make Kamala out to be the victim. Oh, the system was against her, right? Again, she was supposed to be his successor, right? She was supposed to be their person for 2024, okay? And she dropped the ball, right? I mean, that's just the reality of the situation. So, who knows? Biden's staff probably were on a power trip. Jill Biden probably was on a power trip too. Yeah, I mean, all that is true, right? When you get power, you want to keep power. You don't want to give it up, right? I get that. But let's be real. Kamala did not give Democrats much of an option because despite whatever Joe Biden wanted to do, we saw when the Democrats said, no, Joe, you can't run, he stepped down, right? When Democrats said, you're out, we're not going to support you if you keep running, he stepped down. So it's the ultimate decision of the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party decided that they would rather roll with Joe Biden than Kamala Harris. And that is what people are refusing to acknowledge. But at this point, again, this is Kamala Harris trying to fix up her image, right? Tell her side of the story, so to speak, just in case she decides to run in 2028. Regardless, I don't think that this really helps her, to be honest with you, because nobody's going to read this book, primarily because nobody gives a damn. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.